Your Honor, the two witnesses that you heard from today made it clear that hearing the truth was valuable to them, to the Ryan family, and it was the truth that Juliana spoke at trial. And ultimately, it was her testimony that likely resulted in the conviction of Brendan Banfield. Until her cooperation, the Commonwealth had only a theory. They had circumstantial evidence, but no direct evidence. When Juliana finally came forward, she offered that direct evidence of what crimes she'd been involved in and what crimes were committed by Brendan Banfield. Your Honor, our position is that justice requires that the court follow the joint recommendation of the parties. Justice requires it because it was an arm's length agreement made by an experienced prosecution team with the approval of the head of the office, with the knowledge of all the facts and circumstances of the case, not just the facts of the case, but issues that would be presented at trial, the presentation of evidence and witnesses, sentencing guidelines, and many other factors that the parties consider beyond what the court might realize. Justice requires it because Joseph Ryan and Christine Banfield and their families deserve justice. By accepting responsibility in this case and cooperating, we avoided two trials. We assured the finality of the decision in this case, and we gave the jury and the Commonwealth and the court confidence that Brendan Banfield would be convicted, as he ultimately was. Justice requires following the agreement because every individual that makes...
Following the recommendation.
Recommendation, yes,
Thank
Your Honor.
you.
And I addressed that in my memo, of course.
Yes.
Every individual that makes a difficult decision to cooperate does so with the belief that the recommendation would be followed or at least considered by the court. The Commonwealth, the courts, and prosecutors in courts everywhere in the country rely on cooperating witnesses to do what Juliana has done in this case, which is to speak to the truth and offer direct evidence of crimes, including those cooperating witnesses that they themselves have committed serious offenses. When a prosecutor makes a promise, the court ought to give it serious weight. Your Honor, I'll say I'm disappointed but not surprised that the Commonwealth didn't advocate today for the recommendation. I have deep respect for Ms. Bristler and Ms. Sands and the prosecution team. I suspect that this is frankly because of public sentiment regarding the agreement that they made.
Recommendation.
I'm going to continue to make that mistake.
I
understand. Your Honor, I just want to touch on a few things that I've just reviewed.
Yes, yes.
Your Honor, the importance of the cooperation. Ms. Sands did communicate to me that she interviewed the foreman of the jury, who said three things to them, three things that Ms. Sands relayed to me, that they believed Juliana Peres Magalhães, that her testimony was integral. That was the word that Ms. Sands used. In other words, central to their decision to convict Brendan Banfield. And third, that they didn't believe Brendan Banfield. Your Honor, that is important for the court to consider because, again, up until her testimony, which was presented first in the Commonwealth series of witnesses, the Commonwealth had only a theory. The Commonwealth had circumstantial evidence, forensic evidence, electronic forensic evidence, digital forensic evidence, and others. But it was Juliana who ultimately told the story firsthand of what occurred. Because that decision was integral in the jury's decision, I think it could be said, and of course the court presided over the entire trial, you can determine her credibility yourself, but the jury certainly found it integral to their decision. And for that reason, the Commonwealth's recommendation, the joint recommendation, should be given heavy consideration by the court in this case. Your Honor, I briefly want to just touch on the delay in cooperating. It was evident to the defense that from Juliana's first date of arrest that they wanted her cooperation desperately. Her cooperation didn't come quickly. And our position is that at that time, she was still under the grip of Brendan Banfield, and the plan that he had convinced her would work. She still believed that there wouldn't be sufficient evidence for a conviction, and she was relying on Brendan's plan to get her through her arrest and prosecution. As she languished in jail, discovery dripped in. We really didn't receive significant discovery until after the preliminary hearing in this case. And even leading up to the trial date, we still hadn't received much of the digital forensic evidence that was made central to Brendan Banfield's case. Your Honor, the tipping point was perhaps the arrest of Brendan Banfield. That broke his grip on Juliana. The communications between Brendan and Juliana ceased. There were no further assurances that things would be okay for her, that they would have a life together afterwards. She was left alone, truly alone. No communications from his mother or family or other people, and no ability for her to actually contact her own family. She was left alone upon Brendan's arrest, and that was a huge factor in her coming forward. Your Honor, when she did come forward, we moved rapidly. We had a lengthy debrief followed by a plea within a day or two of that debrief. The next several months resulted in continued debriefings. We were available at every request of the Commonwealth. She continued to be candid and open with her statements, and I haven't heard any issues with her reluctance to answer questions in those debrief sessions. Your Honor, if she hadn't testified, there's a good chance that Brendan wouldn't have been convicted. First, the Commonwealth believed her. Secondly, Brendan chose to testify himself. I doubt he would have done that without her testimony. He chose to directly challenge her statement of offense, of her account of what occurred, and he was caught in his own lies. Beginning with shortly after cross-examination, the question of whether he loved her or not, and him saying, well, I didn't really love her. There were certain things that were in the way. And finally ending with his testimony about an important meeting that he was going to. Upon reviewing that testimony, his boss came forward and testified the next day that there was no meeting. Brendan's lies ultimately resulted in his conviction, but he might not have testified if Juliana hadn't testified. Your Honor, I appreciate the comments of Joseph Ryan's family, and I've read the letters that were filed by Christine's family, and there's no words I can offer to console them at this time. But it is critical that there was no trial in this case, that there is finality for the families, and that there was cooperation by Juliana that resulted in Brendan's conviction. Your Honor, the last thing I want to comment on is the agreement in this case, the recommendation.
Thank you.
I had hoped the language of the plea agreement says that the Commonwealth recommends. It doesn't say they have to get up and advocate or pound their fist and argue to what extent the cooperation was important. But the court can weigh that yourself. It was critical. Her cooperation and testimony was critical to the outcome of Brendan Banfield's case. This was an agreement for a recommendation that was made with full knowledge of what the facts were of the case and what public sentiment might be regarding the agreement for Juliana in this case. The agreement was made anyway.
Recommendation.
Recommendation.
Thank you.
The recommendation was made with the input of all the victims, of the police department, and all the important people as required by law. And there was no pushback at that time, Your Honor. I have a position in my sentencing memo whether this is an agreement or a recommendation under A1, A, or C. I'll maintain that argument, Your Honor. I ask that the court follow the joint recommendation of the parties and impose an active sentence of no more than time served in this case.
All right, thank you, Mr. Campbell.